woman the FBI would one day name to its most wanted terrorist list was not born a revolutionary. She was made into one. And the book gives you the first lesson without announcing it as one. Assata Shakur tells a small scene from her childhood in the segregated South. At her family's lot, a white man drives up, and in an arrogant voice, he orders her grandmother to open the gate so he can turn his car around. In her autobiography, Assata Shakur records her grandmother's answer. Quote, "No, I can't let you do that." End quote. He tries again, in a nicer voice. She said no again. Picture that. A black child in the segregated South watching a grown black woman refuse a white man to his face and hold her ground. Hold on to that gate, because we are going to come back to it. It isn't only a fact about one Southern childhood. It changes how we read a story we've all inherited. The one that says some people are simply made wrong. There's even a word for it now: radicalized. It's a word you hear in security briefings and news coverage, and I think it can sound like a diagnosis, as if belief were something that happens to the weak. So let me ask the harder question that word lets us skip. If we stop calling it a pathology, where does a revolutionary actually come from? Let's follow the book's own answer. It has 3 parts. The childhood, the crowded field of ideas she moved through by listening, and the movement she joined, and then turned around and criticized from the inside. First, the honest part, because this is a person with a hard record and you deserve it up front. The public record is clear. A New Jersey jury convicted her in 1977 of murdering a state trooper named Werner Furster. He was killed in a shootout on the New Jersey Turnpike in 1973. Years later, in 2013, the FBI named her the first woman on its most wanted terrorist list and offered a reward that came to as much as $2 million at the time. She spent the rest of her life in Cuba, and she died there in 2025 at the age of 78. By her own account in the book, she does not deny being in the car when the shooting happened. So this episode is not a verdict on that highway. It does not retry the case or overturn it. It asks a different question, the one the memoir is actually built to answer. How does a person like her get made in the first place? Here is the answer most of us reach for, and we reach for it without even noticing. A person who ends up on a list like that, we assume, was always going to. There is a broken kind of person, or a fanatical one, and the politics are just the costume the brokenness puts on. In that story, the only interesting question is what was wrong with her, never what she saw. And that is a comfortable place to stop, because if the trouble is a defect that just lands on certain people, then the rest of us never have to ask a harder question. We never have to ask what our own conditions might be teaching. So let's not stop there. Let's take that explanation at full strength and then walk straight into the evidence it cannot hold. If she wasn't born a revolutionary, then something taught her. And the book is specific about where the teaching started. It started at home. Assata Shakur wrote, quote, "In 1950, the year we moved to Wilmington, the South was completely segregated." End quote. She adds that black people were forbidden to go many places, the beach among them. Sit with that for a second. That is the classroom. A child taking in the geography of what her country thought she was, one forbidden place at a time. And into that classroom, the book puts 2 teachers. The first is a grandmother, the woman at the gate, the one who wouldn't open it. What she teaches is refusal, held not as a slogan, but as a posture you keep with your whole body. The second teacher is her Aunt Evelyn. Evelyn, the book says, exposed her to museums and to possibilities, to the sense that the world was bigger than the one she'd been handed. Read those 2 scenes for what the book makes of them. This is an education in dignity, and in refusal, and in one particular idea, that the account the world keeps of you is not the truth about you. It is the kind of education a whole family runs without ever once calling it politics. And notice what it is not. There is no defect here, no damage, just a child learning what her country is, which is already the wrong shape for the story that says the trouble was inside her all along. But here comes the harder objection. Someone is going to say this is just a brainwashing story with better manners. She grew up, she found a movement, and the movement told her what to think. Before we test that, one fair thing to put on the table, because it presses on everything that follows. This whole account of her formation comes from her. She is the witness, telling her own story. Keep that in view. But take her at her word for a moment and watch how she describes becoming political in the first place. Assata Shakur wrote, quote, "The major way I got hip to things was by listening to people," end quote. Listen to what that sentence assumes. Not one recruiter, a crowd. She writes that at Manhattan Community College, more than half the students were Black or Third World, and the Black students there belonged to every kind of organization: Black Muslims, followers of Marcus Garvey, members of Malcolm X's own group, the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and more. Now, that plural, crowded environment does not settle the question. It complicates the brainwashing story, but it cannot disprove it. So let's be honest about the limit. Does a crowded room prove she reasoned freely, untouched by any of it? No. Of course her peers moved her. That is what peers do. But there is a real difference between being pulled among many competing arguments and being handed a single line and told to recite it. And it is that single line, that one script picture, that the diagnosis we started with actually needs. We reach for the image of the brainwashed recruit because it is easier than granting the messier thing the memoir describes. A young woman in a room full of arguments, becoming political out in the open. There is a deeper test, though. The easy story says a real believer takes the movement's line as her own and stops asking questions. So, did she? Because she is not the passive follower that story needs her to be. The memoir shows her as a sharp critic of her own movement, the Black Panther Party. And here is the part that matters. She makes that criticism from the inside, out of a commitment she is keeping, not as a parting shot on her way out the door. She names the failures flatly. Assata Shakur wrote, quote, "Criticism and self-criticism were not encouraged," end quote. And without them, the book warns, people drown in their mistakes. She is just as blunt about tactics. On the idea of defending the party office in a gun battle with the police, her verdict is a single word, quote, "suicidal," end quote, because the police had the manpower and the surprise. Now think about what it means that she wrote that. She wrote it as someone who had served that party, who had been assigned to its Saturday liberation school for the neighborhood's children. And it is hard not to hear an echo of that gate from the beginning. The grandmother who would not open it just because a man with power told her to. This is the same refusal, only turned inward. She will not open the gate for her own side either, not just because they are her own. Now, hold the limit clearly, because it would be easy to claim too much here. The fact that the memoir shows her criticizing the party does not prove she was untouched by its pull. Plenty of loyal members criticize and conform in the very same breath, and she may have been one of them. The memoir alone cannot tell us how often her criticism actually changed what she did. So this is evidence against a purely passive picture of her. It is not proof that she was ever free of the movement's discipline. But even with that limit, These passages are hard to square with a mind on autopilot, a follower who had stopped thinking. Whatever else she was, the book does not let her be only that. Which leaves us with an answer plain enough to argue with. The memoir's portrait of how she became political reads better as an education than as a defect. A segregated childhood, a family that taught dignity, a crowded field of ideas she moved through by listening, a movement she joined and then criticized from within. Formation, not diagnosis. And that makes her politics understandable. It does not make the later events inevitable or harmless or justified. Those same conditions cannot, on their own, explain everything that followed, including the shooting on the turnpike and its legal aftermath. So nothing here treats her path as something that would happen to anyone who lived it. What it does unsettle is the simplest reading, the one that says there was just something wrong with her. But the book will not let us leave clean, and neither should we. She writes that she was, quote, no longer the wide-eyed romantic young revolutionary who believed the revolution was just around the corner, end quote. That self-awareness may be completely genuine. It is also exactly the move an autobiography is best at making. Here is the thing to sit with. This is her account, and an account of an education is also an argument for it. If she is right, then the word radicalization may be hiding a story of education and hard political judgment, and the easy diagnosis is just how we avoid looking. But if her own framing is doing the quiet work, then the whole book becomes a case she is making on her own behalf. This episode does not resolve that, and honestly, I don't think it should. It hands you both things at once, the education and the fact that the story of an education is itself a kind of argument. What it leaves in dispute is the thing the whole argument was always about: who gets to write the record of a life?